"You locked him inside," the girl said, pointing to the metal box. "But when they opened it, they discovered something terrible." Comment with what you thought of this story, giving it a score from 0 to 10, and tell me which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The September afternoon in Stone Creek was beginning to show signs that winter was coming to an end. Arthur Blackwell adjusted the rearview mirror of his silver sedan as he drove along the country road that cut through the Vermont mountains. The 52-year-old businessman had decided to make this trip personally, to visit a special clay supplier, something he would normally delegate to his employees. But lately, any excuse to get out of the empty mansion in Stone Creek was welcome. The engine began to make a strange noise when Arthur was still 20 miles from his supplier's property. First, it was just a low hiss, then a jolt that made the car vibrate. Arthur slowed down, hoping it was just a temporary problem. But when a cloud of white smoke started billowing from the hood, he had no choice but to pull over to the side of the dirt road. The heat of the afternoon sun contrasted with the cool mountain air. Arthur got out of the car and lifted the hood, immediately enveloped in a cloud of steam. He was no expert in mechanics, but it was obvious the problem was serious. He grabbed his cell phone to call for a tow truck, but found there was no signal in the mountainous region. The road was lightly traveled, and he began to calculate how long it would take for someone to pass by. That's when he heard the screams. A high-pitched, desperate voice echoed down the road. Arthur looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound. Among the trees lining the road, he saw a small figure running towards him. It was a girl, looking no older than 4, with messy brown hair and a floral dress that seemed too big for her thin body. "Help! Help!" she screamed, pointing to something further down the road. "Someone's trapped." Arthur felt his heart race. The girl reached him with tears streaming down her face, pulling his shirt with surprising strength for such a small child. "Calm down, little one. Show me where," Arthur said, crouching down to her level. The girl led him down the road, running with small but determined steps. About 100 yards from where his car was, Arthur saw what had frightened the child. A metal box the size of a chest was abandoned in the middle of the road, partially hidden by some rocks. "There's someone inside," the girl said, pointing to the box. "I heard a noise." Arthur approached cautiously. The box was made of rusted metal, with a simple lock that looked like it had been forced. There were scratches on the surface, as if someone had tried to get out from the inside. The businessman felt a shiver run down his spine. "Are you sure you heard a noise coming from here?" he asked, putting his ear close to the box. "Yes, a noise like someone trying to get out," the girl insisted, her big eyes fixed on the box. Arthur hesitated for a moment. It could be dangerous to open something unknown found in the middle of a country road. But the desperation in the child's eyes and the possibility that there really was someone in danger made him act. Carefully, he lifted the lid of the box. What he saw inside left him confused and disturbed at the same time. It was a hand, but not a human hand. A mannequin's hand made of faded pink plastic, with its fingers slightly curved, as if it had been torn from a store display. It was alone in the box, surrounded by some old yellowed newspapers. "I don't understand," Arthur muttered, looking at the girl who now seemed as confused as he was. "But I heard a noise," she insisted, her small voice trembling. Arthur examined the mannequin hand more closely. There was something familiar about it, something that bothered him in a way he couldn't explain. The position of the fingers, the faded color of the plastic, even the small cracks near the wrist. All of it stirred a strange feeling in his chest. Suddenly, like a lightning bolt, a memory struck him. He was 8 years old and playing in the attic of his grandmother's house in Maplewood. His sister, Catherine, 3 years older, had found an old porcelain doll that had lost an arm. They played together, pretending the doll had been injured in an accident and needed to be cared for. Catherine always said that one day they would find the doll's missing arm. Catherine. It had been 40 years since Arthur had thought about those moments with such clarity. His sister had disappeared when he was 12, during one of their parents' many fights that preceded their separation. One day, she was there. The next, she was gone. His parents said she had gone to live with distant relatives, but Arthur never saw her again. "Mister, are you okay?" The girl's voice brought him back to the present. Arthur blinked and realized he had been standing there, holding the mannequin hand and looking at it as if it were a ghost from the past. The girl was watching him with concern, her furrowed brows creating small wrinkles on her childish forehead. "Sorry, little one. It's just, this hand reminded me of something," he said, carefully placing the object back in the box and closing the lid. "What's your name?" "Isabel," she replied, wiping her nose with the sleeve of her dress. "I live over there," she said, pointing to a path that disappeared among the trees. "And your parents? Do they know you're out here alone?" Isabel's face saddened slightly. "I don't have a mommy and daddy. I live with Grandma Eleanor." "Your grandmother must be worried about you," Arthur said, looking in the direction she had pointed. "She's making apple pie. I told her I was going to pick some flowers for her, but then I heard the noise from the box and came to see." Arthur looked at his broken-down car, then at the mysterious box, and finally at the 4-year-old girl who had appeared out of nowhere. The whole situation was surreal, but there was something about Isabel that made him curious. Maybe it was the mature way she spoke, or the determination with which she had run for help when she thought someone was in danger. "You know what, Isabel? My car broke down and I'll have to wait until someone comes to pick me up. Do you think your grandmother would mind if I waited at your house? I promise not to be a bother." Isabel's eyes lit up immediately. "Grandma loves visitors. She always says our house is small, but there's room in her heart for everyone." Arthur smiled for the first time in weeks. There was something comforting in the simplicity of that child. He pushed the box off the road, leaving it under a tree, and followed Isabel down the narrow path that wound through pines and eucalyptus trees. The walk lasted about 15 minutes, and during the whole journey, Isabel talked non-stop about the flowers that grew in the region, about the birds she recognized by their songs, and about how her grandmother made the best apple pie in all of Stone Creek. Arthur listened to her with an attention that he himself found surprising, absorbing every detail of that childish conversation that, strangely, calmed him. When they finally arrived at the property, Arthur found himself in front of a simple house of wood and brick, painted light blue with white trim on the windows. There was a small but well-kept garden with purple hydrangeas blooming despite the season. A porch with rocking chairs completed the bucolic scene that seemed to be from a country painting. "Grandma! Grandma!" Isabel shouted, running towards the door. "I brought a visitor!" A woman of about 78 appeared at the door, drying her hands on a floral apron. Eleanor had grey hair tied in a low bun and bright brown eyes that radiated kindness. Despite her age, her movements were agile and her posture was erect. "Good heavens, Isabel! You gave me such a scare disappearing like that," Eleanor said, but her voice was more relieved than angry. Then, noticing Arthur, she smiled warmly. "And who is this handsome gentleman you've brought?" "This is the man with the broken car, Grandma. He helped me with the box on the road," Isabel explained quickly. Arthur approached and extended his hand. "Arthur Blackwell, Ma'am. Forgive me for showing up unannounced. My car broke down on the road, and your granddaughter kindly offered me a place to wait for the tow truck." Eleanor shook his hand with surprising firmness. "Nonsense, my boy. Imagine apologizing for something like that. Come in, both of you. I just took a batch of cinnamon rolls out of the oven. The inside of the house was small but cozy. The living room had old but well-preserved furniture, and the walls were decorated with black and white photographs and some embroidery in simple frames. The smell of apple pie and fresh bread hung in the air, creating an atmosphere that Arthur hadn't felt in years, the feeling of a true home. While Eleanor served coffee and slices of the still warm bread, Arthur watched Isabel play in the corner of the room with a rag doll. There was something in the way she moved the doll, as if she were recreating situations from the adult world, that reminded him again of Catherine and her elaborate games. "Do you have a family, Arthur?" Eleanor asked, sitting down at the kitchen table. "No," he replied, more abruptly than he intended. I'm single. I live alone." Eleanor nodded with understanding, as if she understood there was a painful story behind that simple answer. "And what do you do for a living?" "I have a ceramics factory in Stone Creek. Nothing too special, but it allows me to live well." "Ceramics," Eleanor repeated, her eyes shining. "What a beautiful thing. I've always admired those who work with their hands, creating useful and beautiful things." Isabel approached the table, holding her doll. "Grandma, can I tell Mr. Arthur about my talent?" Eleanor and Arthur exchanged curious glances. "What talent, my flower? I know how to find lost things," Isabel said with childish pride. "Last week I found Mrs. Martha's wedding ring that she lost in the yard. And before that, I found Mr. Anthony's cat that had been missing for 3 days. Arthur smiled, amused by the seriousness with which the girl spoke of her talent. "Is that so? And how do you do it?" "I don't know how to explain it well," Isabel said, frowning in concentration. "I just know where things are. It's like they're calling me." Eleanor laughed softly. "This girl has an intuition that borders on the supernatural. I've lost count of how many times she's helped me find things I'd lost around the house." Arthur was about to ask another question when his cell phone finally picked up a signal and started ringing. It was his assistant from the factory, probably worried about his whereabouts. After a quick conversation, explaining the situation and asking them to send a tow truck, Arthur hung up with the information that the tow would only arrive the next day due to the distance and the approaching dusk. "It seems I'll have to impose on you even more," he said, feeling genuinely embarrassed. "No imposition at all," exclaimed Eleanor. "It's been so long since we've had a good visitor in the house. Isabel, go get the guest room ready for Mr. Arthur." While the girl ran to prepare the room, Eleanor served more coffee for Arthur. "Tell me something, my boy. You seemed very disturbed when you arrived. Did something happen on the road besides the car breaking down?" Arthur hesitated, but there was something in Eleanor's motherly presence that made him feel safe to share. Isabel found a box on the road. Inside there was a mannequin hand, a strange thing. But what disturbed me was that it reminded me of something from my childhood, of my sister. You have a sister? Had. She disappeared when we were children. It's been 40 years since I've heard anything about her. Eleanor was silent for a moment, watching Arthur attentively. "You know, my boy, sometimes things appear in our lives when we need them most, or when we're ready to deal with them." At that moment, Isabel came running back into the room. "It's ready! The room is all set. Grandma, can I show Mr. Arthur where I found the pretty stone yesterday?" "You can, my flower, but don't go too far from the house." Arthur followed Isabel to the backyard, where there was a small vegetable garden and some fruit trees. The girl led him to a pile of rocks near a stream that cut through the property. "I found it here," she said, pointing to the rocks. "I was looking for a stone to make a mark in my secret garden, and suddenly I knew there was a special stone here." Arthur looked at the pile of ordinary rocks with nothing special about them. "And which one did you choose?" Isabel bent down and, without hesitation, pulled out a medium-sized rose quartz stone with a perfect crystalline formation that shone in the setting sun. "Wow," Arthur murmured, genuinely impressed. "How did you know that stone was there?" "I don't know," Isabel replied, shrugging. It's like it called to me. Arthur took the stone and examined it. It was truly a beautiful piece, one that any collector would be happy to have. The probability of a 4-year-old child finding something like that by chance was very small. Isabel, tell me something. Have you always been able to find things like this? As long as I can remember. Grandma says it's a gift. When they returned to the house, night had already fallen completely. Eleanor had prepared a simple but tasty dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans. During the meal, Arthur observed the dynamic between grandmother and granddaughter, noticing the genuine tenderness that existed between them, but also some signs that worried him. Eleanor ate little, always insisting that he and Isabel serve themselves more. The girl seemed accustomed to small portions, and there was a visible economy in every gesture of the house, from the candles that were lit only when necessary to the way Eleanor reused every piece of paper. Eleanor, may I ask how long the two of you have been living here alone? It's been 3 years since Isabel came to me, the woman replied, stroking her granddaughter's hair. Before that, I lived alone since my husband passed away about 15 years ago, and Isabel's parents. Eleanor and Isabel exchanged a look that Arthur couldn't fully interpret. It's a complicated story, Eleanor said finally. Maybe one day I'll tell you everything properly, but the important thing is that now we're a family, right, my flower? Isabel nodded vigorously, but Arthur noticed a fleeting shadow in her eyes. There were secrets in that house, and he felt that his arrival had awakened something that had been dormant for a long time. The morning brought with it the aroma of fresh coffee and muffins that woke Arthur from a more restful sleep than any he had had in months. For a few seconds he forgot where he was, but the simple window with floral curtains and the sound of female voices in the kitchen brought back the welcoming reality of Eleanor's home. When he went to the kitchen, he found Isabel sitting at the small table, focused on drawing on a piece of brown paper with a worn-out blue-colored pencil. Eleanor was at the sink, washing dishes with the economical movements that Arthur was beginning to recognize as characteristic of her. "Good morning, my boy," Eleanor said, turning with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well? I hope the mattress wasn't too hard." "I slept perfectly, thank you. It's been a long time since I've had such a peaceful night," Arthur replied sincerely. Isabel looked up from her drawing. "Good morning, Mr. Arthur. Want to see what I'm drawing?" Arthur approached the table and looked at the paper. The drawing showed a male figure in a suit next to a car, a tiny little girl, and a rectangular box. Despite the simplicity typical of a 4-year-old, there were surprising details. The worried expression on the man's face, the position of the box exactly as it was on the road, and even small scratches that seemed to represent the steam coming from the car's hood. "It's about yesterday," Isabel explained. "You, me, and the mysterious box." "What a good memory you have," Arthur commented, impressed with the precision of the details. "And what a talent for drawing." "Isabel has always been like this," Eleanor said, serving coffee to Arthur. "Since she was little, she remembers everything with a clarity that sometimes scares me. And she draws everything that marks her. Marks her. That's what she calls it. When something impresses her, she says it marked her, and then she has to draw it." Arthur sipped his coffee, watching Isabel add more details to the drawing. "And about yesterday, Isabel, do you still think you heard a noise coming from that box?" The girl stopped drawing and looked at him seriously. "I did hear it. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was banging inside, but when we opened it, there was only the hand," she completed. "But I heard a noise before you got there. Maybe whoever was inside managed to get out." Arthur felt a chill. Isabel's childish logic made sense in a disturbing way. If there really had been someone trapped in the box, that person could have escaped before he arrived, leaving only the mannequin hand as... What? A clue? A warning? Grandma, Isabel said suddenly, can I show Mr. Arthur my collection? Eleanor hesitated for a moment. I don't think he'll be interested in those childish things, my flower. Actually, I'd love to see it, Arthur said, curious. Isabel led him to her room, a small but organized space with a single bed covered by a patchwork quilt. What caught Arthur's attention most was an improvised shelf where Isabel kept her collection, a variety of objects with no apparent connection to each other. There was the rose quartz stone she had found the day before, but also an old golden button, a small rusty key, a dented silver thimble, an old coin, and other small objects she had found over time. I found each of these when it was lost, Isabel explained with pride. This button was in the church garden for 6 months. The key was under the old bridge. The thimble... Where did you find the thimble? Arthur interrupted, picking up the small object. In the abandoned house near the cemetery. It was under a loose floorboard. Arthur examined the thimble more closely. It was silver, with small flowers engraved on the surface. And although it was dented, it was clearly a quality piece. More importantly, it looked old, possibly from decades ago. Isabel, do you remember when you found this? 2 months ago. I was walking with Grandma near the old Martinelli house, and I felt there was something important there. Grandma didn't want to let me go in, but I insisted so much that she gave in. A strange feeling took hold of Arthur. The Martinellis were a traditional family from Stone Creek, and he vaguely remembered hearing about a house they had abandoned decades ago after some family tragedy. Eleanor, he called, returning to the kitchen. Can I ask about this Martinelli house that Isabel mentioned? Eleanor's face closed up slightly. It's an old house, abandoned for a long time. Why do you ask? Isabel found this thimble there, Arthur said, showing her the object. It looks old, of sentimental value. Eleanor took the thimble and examined it carefully, her expression becoming thoughtful. My God, she murmured. It's been years since I've seen a thimble like this. You know it? Not this one specifically, but the style. My sister had one just like it. She was a seamstress, always worked with fine pieces. Eleanor paused, as if deciding how much she should reveal. She lived in that house for a while, in the 80s. Your sister, Jane, she disappeared a long time ago. She left town and never came back. Arthur felt his heart speed up. Disappeared how? One day she was here. The next, she was gone. She just left a note saying she had to leave, that she had problems to solve. Eleanor sighed deeply. I never heard from her again. And where did she work, besides sewing, in various places? Jane was always resourceful, worked wherever a job came up. For a while she worked at a factory. What was the name of it? Arthur waited, his breath held. Blackwell, Eleanor said finally. Blackwell. Ceramics factory? The world seemed to spin around Arthur. Jane Smith. Yes, that was her full name. How do you know? Arthur sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, his legs suddenly weak. She worked for me. Jane Smith was my employee for 3 years. She was one of the best employees I've ever had. Eleanor stared at him in amazement. Are you serious? Completely. She worked with me from 2016 to 2019. She left abruptly in May 2019, just left a formal resignation letter. I never understood why. She always seemed happy at work. May 2019, Eleanor. Repeated slowly. That was exactly when Isabel came to me. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Arthur felt the pieces of a complex puzzle moving in his mind, but he still couldn't form a clear picture. Eleanor, he said carefully, who brought Isabel to you? The older woman hesitated for a long time before answering. A young woman. She didn't give her full name. She was very nervous in a hurry. She said Isabel was her daughter, but that she couldn't take care of her for a while. She promised to come back. What did she look like? Brown hair, green eyes, thin. She looked scared, as if she were running from something. Arthur looked at Isabel, who had returned to the table and was continuing her drawing, seemingly oblivious to the tense conversation happening around her. The brown hair, the green eyes, the delicate facial structure. Eleanor, do you happen to have any old photos of your sister Jane? I have a few, yes. Why? I'd very much like to see them. Eleanor disappeared into her room and returned a few minutes later with a small shoebox. Inside was a collection of old photographs, some black and white, others color but faded by time. She chose one photo and handed it to Arthur. This is from our cousin's wedding in 1985. Jane is here on the left. Arthur held the photograph with trembling hands. The woman in the photo was about 25, with wavy brown hair tied in an elegant style and a radiant smile. But it was her eyes that left him breathless, distinctive green eyes with the same almond shape that he saw in Isabel every day. "My God," he whispered. "What is it? The resemblance?" "Isabel has the same eyes, exactly the same." Eleanor took the photo back and mentally compared it to Isabel. "Now that you mention it, I always thought she reminded me of someone in the family, but I could never quite place who." Arthur stood up and began to pace the small kitchen, trying to process all the information. Jane Smith, his former employee, was Eleanor's sister. Jane had disappeared at the same time Isabel had come to live with her grandmother, and Isabel bore a striking physical resemblance to Jane. "Eleanor," he said finally, "do you think it's possible that the woman who brought Isabel to you was your sister?" "Jane, I don't know. It had been so many years since I'd seen her. People change, and she was so nervous, almost unrecognizable." Eleanor paused, her face reflecting an internal struggle. "But now that you mention it, there was something familiar in her voice, something that bothered me at the time, but I couldn't identify." At that moment, Isabel approached them, holding her finished drawing. "I'm done. Do you want to see?" Arthur looked at the drawing again, but this time he noticed something he had missed before. In the bottom corner of the paper, Isabel had drawn a small female figure, almost hidden among the trees, watching the scene with the box on the road. "Isabel, who is this person here?" he asked, pointing to the figure. "Oh, that's the lady who was watching us yesterday," she replied casually. Arthur and Eleanor exchanged alarmed glances. "What lady?" Eleanor asked. "A lady with brown hair." She was hiding behind the trees, watching when Mr. Arthur opened the box. "I thought it was strange, so I drew her." "Why didn't you say anything yesterday?" Arthur asked, feeling a shiver run down his spine. "I forgot. I only remembered when I was drawing." Arthur bent down to Isabel's level. "Could you describe this lady better? What was she wearing?" Isabel closed her eyes, concentrating. She was wearing a blue blouse and dark pants. Her hair was down to here, she said, touching her own shoulders, and she looked sad, very sad. Sad how? Like someone who lost something important and doesn't know how to find it. The childish but surprisingly precise description left Arthur disturbed. If there really was someone watching the scene with the box, it meant the incident had not been random. Someone wanted that box to be found, and possibly wanted it to be found by him specifically. The sound of an approaching engine interrupted his thoughts. It was the tow truck coming to get his car. Arthur knew he should leave, go back to his routine life in Stone Creek, but he felt that being in that house had triggered something important, a series of connections he couldn't simply ignore. "Eleanor," he said, watching the tow truck stop on the road, "I'd like to make a proposal. Can I come back this weekend? I'd like to investigate this story about your sister more, and maybe help you with some things." "Help how?" "I noticed that you live simply. There's nothing wrong with that, but if I can contribute in some way." Eleanor's face hardened slightly. "We don't need charity, Mr. Arthur. We live just fine the way we are." "I didn't mean charity," Arthur said quickly. "I meant help between people who could become friends. And besides, I have a personal interest in finding out more about Jane. She was an important employee to me." Isabel tugged on Eleanor's skirt. "Grandma, let him come back. I like Mr. Arthur, and he can help me understand why. I found the box." Eleanor looked at her granddaughter, then at Arthur, and finally sighed. "All right, but no expensive gifts or anything like that. Our house is simple, but it's ours." "Deal," Arthur said, relieved. While the mechanic prepared his car for towing, Arthur said goodbye to Isabel and Eleanor. But just as he was about to get into the tow truck, Isabel ran up to him and handed him a folded piece of paper. "It's for you," she said shyly. Arthur unfolded the paper and found a simple drawing. Him, Isabel, and Eleanor sitting at the kitchen table, all smiling. At the top of the paper, in shaky letters, was written, "Family, thank you, Isabel, I'll cherish it." As the truck drove away down the country road, Arthur looked in the rearview mirror and saw Isabel wave until he disappeared among the trees. For the first time in years, he had the feeling that something important was about to begin in his life, something that could change everything. But he had no idea how profoundly his existence would be transformed by the discoveries that awaited him. The rest of the week passed in a fog of restlessness for Arthur. Back to his routine at the ceramics factory, he constantly found himself thinking about Isabel, Eleanor, and the disturbing connections he had discovered. On Thursday, he could no longer resist and decided to investigate the company's old files for information about Jane Smith. The factory office occupied the second floor of a commercial building in downtown Stone Creek. Arthur went down to the basement where he kept the old files, a dusty space full of boxes organized by year. He quickly found the employee folder from 2016 to 2019 and located Jane's file. The basic information was all there. Jane Smith, 45 years old at the time of hiring, single, address on a street Arthur didn't recognize, but it was the emergency contacts section that perplexed him. It was blank, no family, no friends, nothing. For someone who had worked there for 3 years, it was strange not to have any personal reference. What intrigued him most was finding a note in the margin of the file written in his own hand. Exemplary employee, discreet, punctual, efficient, never absent, never late, avoids personal conversations. He vaguely remembered making that note for a possible promotion that never happened because Jane left the company. Arthur picked up the phone and called Maria, his secretary of over 10 years. "Maria, do you remember an employee named Jane Smith? She worked here until 2019. "Of course I remember," Maria replied. "Strange woman. Worked well, but was very private. Never participated in the company parties, never talked about her personal life, and she left all of a sudden without proper notice." "Do you remember anything specific about her departure?" "I do, because it was very strange. She came in on a Monday morning, worked normally, and at the end of the day left the resignation. Letter on my desk. When I arrived on Tuesday, she was already gone, didn't even say goodbye to anyone. And you didn't find that suspicious?" "I did, especially because she was always so proper. But you were going through those personal problems at the time with your wife's doctors. We didn't want to bother you with employee matters." Arthur closed his eyes, remembering that painful time. His wife, Mariana, was in the final stages of her illness, and he could barely concentrate on work. It was understandable that details about an employee's departure had gone unnoticed. "Maria, would you know if Jane had any connection to the Martinelli family, the family that had that old house near the cemetery?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What a strange question, Mr. Arthur. Why do you want to know?" "It's a long story. But would you know?" "Not that I recall. But wait. Now that you mention the Martinellis, there was something strange around the time Jane left. Victor Constantine came here looking for information about her." Arthur felt his blood run cold. Victor Constantine was his ex-partner, a man with whom he had broken off. business relations precisely in 2019, after discovering irregularities in the contracts he managed. Victor was at the company looking for Jane. He was. It was about 2 days after she left. He said he had pending business with her, but didn't go into details. When he found out she had left, he got very angry. Angry how? Agitated, you know. Asked some odd questions about where she lived, if she had left a new address. Things like that. He even threatened to come back with a lawyer if we didn't give him the information. Arthur hung up the phone, his mind racing. The connection between Jane and Victor added a sinister layer to the whole situation. Victor was not just a problematic ex-partner, he was a man with known involvement in questionable businesses, especially related to irregular documentation of rural properties. That same afternoon, Arthur made an impulsive decision. He cancelled his appointments and drove to Eleanor's house. He needed to talk to them about Victor and try to better understand the circumstances of Jane's disappearance. When he arrived at the rural property, he found Eleanor in the garden, tending to the hydrangeas. Isabel was sitting on the porch, drawing in, her notebook as always. "Arthur!" Isabel shouted, running to greet him. "Grandma, Mr. Arthur is back." Eleanor approached, wiping her hands on her skirt. "What a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you until the weekend. Sorry for showing up unannounced, but I've discovered some information about Jane that I believe you should know." Eleanor's expression immediately became serious. "What kind of information?" They sat on the porch while Arthur recounted his conversation with Maria and the connections to Victor Constantine. Eleanor listened in silence, but Arthur noticed that her hands trembled slightly when he mentioned Victor's name. "Do you know this man?" he asked. Eleanor hesitated before answering. "I've heard of him. He has a bad reputation in the area. They say he's involved in shady deals with land and documents." "Eleanor, I need to ask you something difficult. Are you sure you didn't recognize the woman who brought Isabel to you? Because if she really was Jane, and if Victor was looking for her, you think she was running from him? It's possible. And if that's true, Isabel might be in danger." Isabel, who had been focused on her drawing until then, looked up. "Grandma, can I say something?" "Of course, my flower. Sometimes I dream about a lady with brown hair. She's always crying and saying she needs to protect someone. In the dream, she gives me something and says it's very important." Arthur and Eleanor exchanged worried glances. "What kind of thing does she give you in the dream?" Arthur asked gently. "A tiny key, just like the one I have in my collection." Arthur remembered the rusty key he had seen among Isabel's objects. "Can you show me that key again?" Isabel ran to her room and returned with the small key. Arthur examined it more, carefully this time, noticing details he had missed before. The key had an antique shape, possibly from a small safe or strongbox. "Where exactly did you find this?" "Under the old bridge, near the river. It was buried in the sand." "When?" "Right after I got here. Grandma was showing me the town, and I felt that there was something important under the bridge." Arthur looked at Eleanor. "Do you remember that day?" "I do. It was strange because Isabel insisted on going down to the riverbank. She said she had lost something there, even though she had never been to that place before." A disturbing theory began to form in Arthur's mind. If the woman who brought Isabel was really Jane, and if she was fleeing from Victor, it was possible that she had hidden something important before she left. Something that only Isabel, with her peculiar ability to find lost objects, could locate. "Eleanor, would you know if there is any old safe or strongbox in town that this key could open?" "Well, there's the old safe at the county clerk's office. And I know some of the older merchants in town have old safes in their own homes. Why do you ask? I'm thinking that maybe Jane left something hidden for Isabel to find, something important enough that she had to run from Victor." At that moment, Isabel approached them again, this time carrying her most recent drawing. "I finished drawing my dream," she said, handing the paper to Arthur. The drawing showed a brown-haired woman kneeling beside a bridge, burying something in the sand. Behind her, a shadowy male figure watched from a distance. In the corner of the paper, Isabel had drawn a small girl, clearly herself, holding a key. "Isabel," Arthur said carefully, "in your dream, does the lady say anything else besides that she needs to protect someone? She says that one day someone from her family will come looking, and that when that happens, I will know what to do with the key." Arthur felt a shiver run down his spine. "And you think I'm that person from her family?" Isabel looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "You worked with her, didn't you? And you were sad when she left. And now you're here, looking for answers." "I think so." Isabel's childish but penetrating reasoning left Arthur speechless. For the next few minutes, they discussed the possibility of investigating the places where the key could be used. Eleanor was reluctant, worried about safety, but Arthur argued that understanding what Jane had hidden could be crucial to protecting Isabel. "There's one more thing," Eleanor said finally. "The woman who brought Isabel. She mentioned something about important papers. She said she had left some documents in a safe place and that one day she would come back for them. What kind of documents? She didn't say, but she was very nervous when she talked about it. She said they were things that could harm. They're bad people if they were found by the wrong people." Arthur stood up and began to pace the porch, processing all the information. Jane had disappeared from the company during the same period Isabel had come to live with Eleanor. Victor had looked for Jane shortly after her disappearance. Isabel had a key she had found mysteriously, and she dreamed of a woman who matched Jane's description. "Eleanor," he said finally, "tomorrow morning I'd like to take Isabel to try and use this key on the old safes in town. With your permission, of course. Is it dangerous? I don't believe so. We'll just go to public places, the clerk's office, some old shops. If there really is something hidden by Jane, it could contain important information about why she disappeared." Eleanor looked at Isabel, who was watching the conversation attentively. "What do you think, my flower? Do you want to help Mr. Arthur solve this mystery?" Isabel nodded vigorously. "I do. And I have a feeling we're going to find something very important." "A feeling? It's like when I find lost things. I feel that there's something waiting to be found." Arthur spent the night at Eleanor's house again, but this time his sleep was restless. He dreamed of Jane, of Victor, of keys and old safes, and mostly he dreamed of his sister Catherine, who seemed to be trying to tell him something important through the mists of time. When he woke up the next morning, he was sure that the day would bring revelations that would change everything. What he didn't know was that the discoveries awaiting him would be far more shocking than anything he could imagine. As they had breakfast, Isabel held the small key and closed her eyes. "Today we are going to discover a very big secret," she said with the mysterious confidence she always showed when it came to her premonitions. And Arthur was sure she was right. Saturday morning brought with it a fine mist that covered the mountains around Stone Creek, creating a mysterious atmosphere that seemed fitting for the day of revelations that was approaching. Arthur, Eleanor, and Isabel left early for the center of town, with the small, rusty key carefully tucked into the pocket of Isabel's dress. The first stop was the oldest county clerk's office in town, a colonial building that had been in operation since the beginning of the last century. The clerk, Mr. Gerald Moore, was a 70-year-old man who knew the history of every traditional family in Stone Creek. "A key like this," he said, examining the object with a magnifying glass. "Interesting. It looks like it's from an old safe model we had here until the 90s, but it was replaced by a more modern system." "What happened to the old safe?" Arthur asked. "It was sold to an antique dealer in town. If I'm not mistaken, it was the establishment of the late Mr. Robert Martinelli. The name Martinelli made Arthur and Eleanor exchange significant glances. Martinelli, from the family that had that abandoned house. Exactly. Robert was the patriarch of the family. He died about 15 years ago, but the antique shop still exists. His daughter Constance keeps the business running. They headed to the antique shop, located on a narrow street in the historic center. The establishment was a fascinating labyrinth of old furniture, clocks, dishes, and curious objects accumulated over decades. Constance Martinelli, a woman of about 50 with grey hair tied in a messy bun, received them with evident curiosity. When Arthur explained that they were looking for an old safe that had possibly belonged to the clerk's office, she led them to the back of the store. "It's here," she said, pointing to a medium-sized cast-iron safe with Victorian-style ornaments. "Dad bought it from the clerk's office many years ago. We could never open it because we didn't have the key." Isabel approached the safe, holding her small key. Even before trying it, she looked at Arthur with absolute confidence. "This is it," she said simply. The key fit perfectly into the lock. After a few attempts to overcome the years of rust, the mechanism gave way. With a characteristic metallic click, Arthur carefully opened the safe door, revealing its contents. Inside was a smaller metal box, some yellowed papers, and surprisingly, an old porcelain doll that was missing an arm, exactly like the one Arthur remembered from his childhood with Catherine. "My God," Eleanor murmured, immediately recognizing the doll. "This doll belonged to our family. It was our grandmother's." Arthur picked up the papers with trembling hands. The first document was a birth certificate, Jane Smith Martinelli, born in 1974. The second document left him breathless. It was a birth certificate for a child named Catherine Blackwell. "Martinelli, born in 1975. "Catherine," Arthur whispered. "Jane was my sister Catherine." Eleanor held his arm, her eyes filling with tears. "How is that possible?" "She changed her name," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "My sister was alive this whole time, working for me, and I didn't recognize her." The third document was a letter, written in the careful handwriting that Arthur now recognized from the reports that Catherine, had made at the factory. "To whoever finds these papers, my real name is Catherine Blackwell. I changed my identity to Jane Smith to hide from Victor Constantine, who discovered my true identity and tried to blackmail me. Victor has false documents proving illegal business involving the Martinelli family's lands. He threatened me because I discovered he was using the false identities of some dead clients to transfer properties. I had to leave my daughter Isabel with Eleanor to protect her. If anything happens to me, I hope my brother Arthur finds this letter and takes care of my girl. Isabel is the most precious thing I have in the world." Arthur sat down heavily in a nearby chair, the letter trembling in his hands. Isabel was his niece. Catherine had had a daughter and had worked for him for years without revealing her identity. "There's more," Constance said, pointing to the smaller box inside the safe. Inside the box were photographs from Arthur and Catherine's childhood, including some he had lost when his parents separated. There was also a sealed envelope with the name Arthur written on the front. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope. "My dear brother, if you are reading this, it means you managed to find the clues I left for Isabel to discover. I know about her special talent, my love. She inherited it from our family. Our grandmother also had this ability. I worked at your company for 3 years, watching you from afar, wishing I could reveal who I was. But Victor threatened me, said that if I told the truth, he would destroy you and the factory with the false documents he possessed. I had to leave to protect you and Isabel. I'm hiding in a private clinic in Maplewood, pretending to have mental health issues so Victor won't find me. Please, come get me. Please take care of our girl. With all my love, your sister who never stopped loving you, Catherine." The tears were now flowing freely down Arthur's face. 40 years of pain, of unanswered questions, of guilt for not having looked for his sister, all dissolved in a mixture of relief and regret. Isabel approached him and held his hand. "You're my uncle," she said with childish simplicity. "I felt you were my family from the very first day." "How did you know?" "The same way I know how to find lost things, some important things you just feel in your heart." Eleanor, who was also crying, hugged Arthur. "Now I understand why Catherine, told me that one day someone from her family would come looking for Isabel. She knew you wouldn't give up." Constance Martinelli, who had witnessed the entire revelation in respectful silence, finally spoke. "I think you need to know one more thing. Victor Constantine was here 2 months ago looking for this safe. He offered a lot of money for it, but I refused. He said he had urgent business to resolve." "He's still looking for Catherine," Arthur said, a new determination growing in his chest. "I need to find her before he finds out where she is." The next day, Arthur left Isabel with Eleanor and headed to Maplewood. He found the private clinic mentioned in the letter, a discreet place that catered to patients who needed anonymity for various reasons. When he saw Catherine for the first time in 40 years, Arthur could barely stand. She was thinner, with graying hair, but her green eyes were exactly the same as the girl who played with him in their grandmother's attic. "Arthur?" she said, slowly rising from her chair in the clinic's garden. "How did you find me? Our niece has a special talent for finding lost things," he said, hugging her tightly. "And I should have looked for you a long time ago." The reunion was both emotional and painful. Catherine told him about her years on the run, about how she had discovered Victor's illegal dealings when she worked as a seamstress for some of the region's wealthy families. She had witnessed document forgeries and illegal property transfers involving millions of dollars. "Victor found out I knew too much. He threatened me, said he would destroy you if I said anything. I had to disappear, change my identity. And Isabel, I met her father in São Paulo, where I hid for a few years. He passed away when she was still a baby. When I learned that Victor had tracked me to São Paulo, I had to come back to Vermont and leave Isabel with Eleanor. It was the hardest decision of my life." In the days that followed, Arthur took legal action to expose Victor Constantine. With the documents found in the safe and Catherine's testimony, he gathered enough evidence for the authorities to investigate the ex-partner's illegal businesses. Victor tried one last desperate maneuver, offering Arthur money to forget the whole situation. When that failed, he threatened to destroy the factory's reputation, but Arthur no longer cared. He had found something far more valuable than any business: his family. 6 months later, Arthur's life had completely transformed. Catherine was recovered and living on the rural property with Eleanor and Isabel, who was now officially 5 years old and continued to surprise everyone with her ability to find lost objects. Arthur's lonely mansion in Stone Creek was sold, and he built a larger house on the rural property where the whole family could live together. The factory was still doing well, but now Arthur had learned to imbalance work and family. Victor Constantine was arrested for document forgery and real estate fraud, ending years of crimes that had separated the Blackwell family. On a Sunday afternoon, Arthur watched Isabel play in the garden with the porcelain doll they had found in the safe. Catherine had sewn a new arm for the doll, completing it after decades. "Uncle Arthur," Isabel said, running up to him, "guess what I found today?" She opened her small hand, revealing a golden button with the Blackwell family crest, the same one that adorned the school uniform coat Arthur wore in his childhood. "Where did you find this?" "It was buried under the mango tree. I think Grandma Eleanor lost it a long time ago." Eleanor approached, drying her hands on her apron. "My goodness, Isabel, this button was from your uncle's school coat, from when he was a boy. I lost it while doing laundry more than 30 years ago." Arthur held the button, smiling. Some lost treasures really could be found even after decades. Sometimes all they needed was someone with an open heart and the special gift to see beyond the obvious. That night, sitting on the porch of the new house, with Catherine by his side and Isabel sleeping in his lap, Arthur finally understood the true meaning of wealth. It wasn't in properties or businesses, but in the bonds that time had tested and love had preserved. The mysterious box on the road had been just the first step of a journey that brought him back home, not to a place, but to the people who truly mattered. And Isabel, with her extraordinary talent and her pure heart, had been the key that opened the doors to a future he had never dared to dream of. The soft sound of the girl's breathing, mixed with the chirping of crickets and the distant murmur of the stream, created a symphony of peace that Arthur knew he would cherish forever in his heart. Finally, after 40 years, he was complete. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.